Ethan, welcome to the All Things Risk podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on. I think we're going to have a fascinating conversation. So welcome.
Hi, Ben. Thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. And we were just saying, I came across an article that you wrote in Canada's Globe and Mail about cryptocurrency, and it led me to your book, Once a Bitcoin Miner, and it really made it filled in a lot of gaps that I had about cryptocurrency. So I think that a lot of my listeners are crypto conscious. Some of our listeners may be crypto curious, and some of them may be well invested. But before we get into all of that, it would be great if you could just paint a little picture about your background and how you got into cryptocurrency in the first place.
Mm-hmm. So I am a journalist. I write a column in this Canadian newspaper called The Financial Post. And before that, I wrote for Reuters. And before that, I was a Bitcoin investor, and I think I still am. We all contain multitudes. And I got in around 2013, and it's been a wild ride through the space. And among my adventures, I ended up in North Korea at one point, and wrote a book on that.
We'll talk about all of that. Before we get into that, though, is 2013, early days of Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. What led you there? What got you into it in the first place?
So I think everyone has these stories of how they ended up in crypto, and I think it's fascinating that everyone's story is different. And for me, it started in my second year of university. It was 2012, 2013, and my friends and I, we were just basically on the dark web for no good reason. And that was my first exposure to Bitcoin, because I could see that when people buy and sell things there, the medium of transaction, that was Bitcoin. But I wasn't like totally sold back then. It took me like almost a whole year to actually invest. And part of that was a conversation with Anthony DiOrio, who at the time, he wasn't that notable, but he later went on to co-found Ethereum.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell me a little bit about that conversation with Anthony DiOrio? You talk about it a little bit in the book, but at what point did you sort of say, did you say, I get this, and so I'm going to dive in, or did you say, well, this is interesting, I'm going to dip my toe? How did that conversation shape your initial decision to get into the world of crypto?
So it definitely wasn't like a snap of the finger thing. So, and that conversation was one factor. And I would say the whole period between when I first heard of Bitcoin and when I first invested, that was a whole period of slowly, incrementally getting it. And my conversation with Anthony DiOrio, that was basically the first time I talked to someone who was actually in Bitcoin. And I think I think there are now people who call me old school because I invested in 2013. But in 2013, Anthony DiOrio was truly old school. He was in a long time before that. And he was just able to elucidate everything quite clearly for me. And he also made a price prediction that turned out to be true. And lots of people like to make price predictions, but they end up on the wrong side of history, but not him.
Mm-hmm. So let's fast forward to this book, Once a Bitcoin Miner, and talk a little bit about the origin story of that book. And I suppose we'll go back and fill in. There's lots of great stuff and wonderful stories, but where did the idea for this book come from, and what did you envision doing with it? Who are you trying to reach with it?
So I first got the vague hints of this idea for a book in like 2014, but I don't think I really made any concrete steps to make it into a book until maybe 2018. And so that was like a long process, incrementally developing as well. And The reason I wanted to write this is that I think lots of books and lots of writers, they tend to look at crypto either through the lens of either computer science or monetary policy, and can be quite dry, and it can be a little daunting to the uninitiated. And so this book, I try to look at it through the lens of the human condition, and at its heart, it's a narrative nonfiction. It's a series of stories, and I think that gets people in a much easier way.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And one of the things that really stuck out from the book for me is how every one of these little stories and some of the characters, they're very colorful, and they seem to be seeking something a little bit maybe different, and maybe that relates to your situation as well. Maybe we could just start with a little bit of some of the. So you got involved in this. You mentioned North Korea. Let's talk about North Korea, and if you could explain a little bit about how your journey into cryptocurrency took you into North Korea.
So North Korea is not well liked by the rest of the world, so it's subject to lots of economic sanctions, and so it basically cannot conduct international trade to the same degree as other countries, and that is actually very harsh on the economy. So cryptocurrency, being outside the traditional financial system, theoretically is a way to cut through all of that. And so North Korea has been accused of doing lots of shady stuff with crypto. Lots and lots of reports that I've read. But at the same time, what we see from the outside, I think it often isn't a complete picture, because it's very hard to get information from North Korea. So when it announced a cryptocurrency conference, which was going to take place in 2019, and I just knew I had to go. I had to go see for myself, and that's how I started on that trip.
So what was the objective of that conference? They or what did you understand it at the time that you decided to go?
Well, I thought I would be able to at least mingle or interact with the North Korean crypto people. I would be able to see and hear firsthand what the country has been doing. And there were lots of news reports about this at the time, and they interviewed experts, and they were all saying, oh, North Korea, this is like a show of force. They're showing people that they can do crypto. But it basically turned out to be the exact opposite.
So you tell that story in the book. So how many people were at this conference? Were foreigners, I guess, were at this conference with you?
Just 8.
Just 8, yeah. And you tell a story of you were thinking that you were going to hear about things from North Korea, but then the tables turned and you guys were asked to present to the North Koreans.
Yeah, that was a very strange thing. And well, I think some people, I think 1 or 2, they were going to North Korea as speakers.
Okay. So
they were expecting that. But the rest of us, we thought we were there as passive participants.
Right.
And so a lot of the speakers at the conference, they just made up their stuff just a couple of days beforehand.
Right. And what sorts of things did they ask to you guys to present on?
It was actually really boring stuff. It was just crypto 101, things you can read on a Wikipedia page. And I think ultimately this whole conference, it was organized by the cultural people in North Korea. Their day jobs, they were chaperoning foreign journalists. So we did not meet the tech people. I'm sure they exist, but for us, it was just a glorified dog and pony show.
Right. And do you think that they were trying to get information out of you guys that might be useful to them in however they're trying to use crypto, or did it leave you scratching your head and thinking these guys don't know anything about cryptocurrency? Or what was just when you return, what was the vibe? You might have been thinking, God, that was strange.
Yes. Um, I think North Korea definitely has people very well versed in crypto. And North Korean hackers are actually famous across the world. They're very good at this. But we definitely did not meet any of them. And the people we met, they were all saying they didn't know anything. It's probably true. We just didn't meet the experts.
Right. And North Korea is kind of famous for, they have kidnapped people to filmmakers, for example, to make films or all kinds of things. So it did you in retrospect think, oh God, that was a bit of a close one. There was an arrest that happened in amongst your group. So did you maybe you could talk a little bit about that, but it sounded like when you got back, it was just sort of you just kind of continued on your journey, and then this arrest occurred, which was really interesting. If you could talk a little bit about that might be an interesting place to go.
Oh yeah, so it's quite ironic, I think, that the lone arrest to come out of the trip, it was done by the Americans. And I definitely did not fear for my safety going to North Korea, because this was something advertised to the public. They were telling people to go. And North Korea, despite how secretive it is, tourists go there all the time. And maybe not now because of the pandemic, but before that, it was a thing. And so the guy arrested, Virgil Griffith, he was the head of special projects at the Ethereum Foundation. So pretty big deal. And he was the only one among the 8 who was actually a big deal in crypto. And basically, he's been arrested for speaking at the conference, and he's charged with trying to help North Korea evade sanctions through blockchain, trying to impart the sacred fire of this technology to the North Koreans. And he pleaded guilty last month, and in a plea deal for up to 6.5 years.
Wow. Yeah, that makes it quite serious, I guess, and what maybe, I mean, we're amongst that community at that time. Was this viewed as a what is this? If you could describe the crypto community, that particularly some of those people that you were in North Korea with, what was it viewed as a hobby, as a sense of community, as an investor club, as a what are these people looking for? What are some of the commonalities that arose amongst some of these people?
Well, I can talk about the people with whom I went to North Korea. So
yes.
8 of us. So right before we went to North Korea, we first met in Beijing, because you can only go into North Korea from either Beijing or China or Russia. And first time I met him first time I met everyone in a Peking duck restaurant. There's a guy who said to me, "What made you decide to do this outlandish thing of going to North Korea?" And I looked at him and I said, "Well, what about you?" And then we all laughed. And I think in an unspoken way, we knew that we shared something. And we never talked about that again. But I think, and we had really nothing in common other than crypto and North Korea. But I think we knew that we shared, like, perhaps a sense for adventure.
And curiosity, would you say?
Yeah.
Was there anything that struck you about just the experience that you was either in the book or something that you didn't get a chance to mention in the book about North Korea, just for those who haven't ever been? That, you know, imagine it was a curated North Korea that you saw, but was there something that just stuck with you during that? I think it was a week, was it not?
Oh yeah. So I was born in China, and I would tell my parents over the years of all the crazy stuff that emanates from North Korea. And my father would say, "That's not crazy at all. That was like the China in which I grew up." But China has changed so much throughout the years, and North Korea has remained stagnant. So I've always thought, if I go to North Korea, it's like a time capsule. I can see the land of my parents in a way. And it's kind of like that. The actual conference was only 2 days, and aside from that, we had several other days there, and they brought us along to basically show us stuff, and they were showing off things that were pretty unspectacular by Western standards. Like they showed us the arcade games that companies made, and they looked like they were made 20 years ago. And one of them, there wasn't even any objectives in it, and you grabbed a gun and you just shot at cows, and I don't think the game even ends. It's just unending carnage. And I think a lot of large parts of the country, they're quite backwards.
Yeah. Okay. And Virgil got charged with some sort of helping North Korea develop their crypto capabilities in order to do all these things, evade sanctions and all this kind of stuff. And what struck me when you described it in the book, and maybe you could share a little bit, is how did cryptocurrency, did it stop becoming fun at that point, or at some point in your journey?
Yeah, I think learning of his arrest, which was an absolute shock. On the trip, I did not expect it to make the news in any way. And that was the day after Thanksgiving. And yeah, it was definitely a sobering moment. And I think another sobering moment was that, so I spent some time on a Thai island. It had a cryptocurrency incubator. And I think at the time there was a lot of new wealth in crypto. Mm-hmm. And
what is a cryptocurrency incubator? What is that all about?
So it's like any other tech incubator. So it would give money to early startups in exchange for a stake in the business. Okay. And it was a little crazy. I think sometimes the partying got a little crazy, but I always have fond memories. So eventually I met a guy who also went to the island, whom I knew before, and he had a motorcycle accident. Like, first time I saw him, he was walking, then I saw him in a wheelchair. And that was also a sobering moment. And I know it doesn't have much to do with crypto, mm-hmm. but it got me thinking, could have been me in that wheelchair. Mm-hmm. And perhaps in another world, could have been me arrested instead of Virgil. Mm.
And Virgil sounded to me like not like somebody who maybe didn't know that they were necessarily doing something untoward, but they just sort of a series of events in his sort of nature just led him there. And would that be a fair way to describe him?
Yeah, I think if you think of what I did by going to North Korea as one level of craziness above normal people, Virgil would be one level of craziness above me. Mm-hmm. So Americans are actually banned from going to North Korea because there was an American who died there. And so he already aroused people's attention by first seeking permission to go there and going when he was denied. So I think that was a big red flag to governments at the time, and they were already watching him.
Right.
And also, I actually declined to speak at the conference.
Right.
So
Smart
I didn't
move.
speak, but he spoke at the conference. And he's also a very open guy, because he is very intelligent. He's at least like 20-30% smarter than me. I can just tell that by talking to him. And he explains everything really well, and he's very open. And I think this openness, he later met up with the authorities, very willingly told them everything. Mm-hmm. And I don't think he realized they were trying to nail him on something until it was too late.
Right. Okay. So let's just then go back to the world of crypto a little bit. And in particular, as we see prices and people, the cab driver that you run into, whomever talking about this stuff. And I actually like this. It's a few years old. In the Daily Show, Ronnie Chang does a little skit on cryptocurrency, and he starts with, "What is it? What is it?" So, in your words, what is it?
Well, I like to think of it as an ecosystem.
Okay.
Like I think everyone sees something different. I like to think of it as a world. I think particularly because industries can spawn subcultures and vice versa. But when you play Dungeons and Dragons as children, you have to sideline it when you're an adult because you cannot be a professional dungeon master. But in crypto, there's not just ideology and common interest binding people together. There is also money streaming in to keep all that passion burning. So I think it's an industry and a subculture put together, but it's also more than that when that happens. It's like 2 + 2 = 5. And it's a very self-contained insular world.
And as more money goes into it, then obviously valuations go up and up and up. And I have an economics degree. So, and I'm just trying to, going back to like you open up an economics textbook and it says a currency is a store of value, a medium of exchange, and a unit of account. So, three things. It's kind of dull if you're not an economist. But when you look at something like Bitcoin or Ethereum or any one of these coins, you think, well, store of value. Well, maybe, because obviously it's actually, appreciated a lot depending on when you may have gotten in. Unit of accounts, nobody's, doing their accounts in Bitcoin. And medium of exchange, well, obviously there's a lot of hurdles with regard to any of these things. Bitcoin has, I guess, a low transaction speed in terms of when you compare it to other things, obviously the energy costs and things like that. So it's like, well, it doesn't seem like this is a currency. And what I'm trying to figure out is this just a big bubble with, this world that people have come into and occupied? Or is there something else? It's like maybe a new financial instrument that's never existed before. And so we kind of, opinion is divided amongst people that are not into this world about what it is. And some are, they want to get in, and some are like, this is all going to zero at some point. And that's kind of dependent on whether or not this is a new kind of asset class or a new financial instrument of some kind, or not. And I'm just trying to wrap my head around it.
Well, I think I have a story to tell you.
Sure.
So it's a true story I've heard, that when Afghanistan it was falling to the Taliban, when the people are trying to get out, most of them they leave penniless. And I think we don't talk about this enough, that because of how bad their currency is, how bad their financial infrastructure is, they just leave with nothing. But there was this young woman who had Bitcoin, and to have it, all you need is a smartphone. And it was a harrowing journey for her out of Afghanistan. She went through Turkey and Iran, and her ship sank in the Mediterranean. But when she landed in Germany, she had essentially memorized her passphrase. So she was just carrying 2 Bitcoins in her head. She had nothing but the clothes on her back, but she was able to fund a new life that way. And I think ultimately what Bitcoin represents, it's a form of financial system, but without a central administrator. So it's something that's, they call it anti-fragile.
Yeah, that's a Nassim Taleb term from his book, and that's a great story, and it represents one of the use cases, I guess, of this currency, of this asset, and yeah, maybe there's something there that we're just coming to understand. That's a wonderful story. Similarly, though, you hear all the stuff about it's used to buy drugs and weapons and things like this, and carry out kidnap for ransom. You had a story of a hack, didn't you? A Russian hacker tried to get at your assets.
Yeah. So it wasn't Bitcoin that was hacked. It was my email account. And so the reason people like to hack people in crypto is, and I think that underscores also how its biggest feature is also, in some perspectives, its biggest bug, that transactions are irreversible, and once something is taken from you, it is forever lost. So yeah, I'm quite lucky that although my email was hacked, I didn't end up losing any. I didn't lose anything. I changed my passwords, and I stupidly had not had two-factor authentication, but I have it now. Yeah, I think that is going to be a big problem going forward.
And Bitcoin is traceable, much like any other mainstream asset, is it not? So it's the anonymous nature of it isn't quite that, is it?
Oh yeah, and those companies that do such tracing, they are making lots of money from government contracts.
Okay, and so what do you make of government's responses to cryptocurrency? It kind of, when I read your book, it kind of, there are different acts that I took away. You got into it, and you thought, oh, this is interesting, and then it dipped, and then you basically became a millionaire through this, and then, but at some point it stopped being, as you say, fun. What do you make of government's responses? You talk a little bit about what some of the Securities Exchange Commissions have been doing. Where are governments in all of this, and what has been the I guess the mainstream response to the rise of cryptocurrencies?
Well, I think different governments are doing different things, but I think quite clearly we can see the US becoming extremely hawkish, increasingly hawkish. And I don't think that reflects an attitude toward crypto per se, but I feel it's part of a bigger shift in the administration targeting the finance sector. And I see that increasing. And at the same time, you see China's big crackdown. And depending on how you define crypto, because China is pushing really hard its own digital currencies. And I think it is something that will vastly empower the state in how it monitors its people, how it controls their behavior. And we're going to see everyone use the China coin one day in China. And at the same time, Latin America, we see countries increasingly adopting Bitcoin because their own economies are just falling apart.
Like El Salvador.
Yeah, and so many other countries there, like Venezuela. I saw this headline. People were shaving off gold flakes to buy things.
At the same time, I guess, what does that mean for currencies like Bitcoin and Ethereum? When we see these evaluations of all-time highs, and you have all kinds of people saying it's going to the moon, but this world of, there's so many things going on where governments are getting involved. There are use cases, but similarly there are these government crackdowns, and so what is the kind of future of let's take just take Bitcoin and Ethereum. Do you think those two, what do you, if you project sort of 5 years from now, I'm not asking for a price prediction, but just in terms of how these things will actually get used, where do you see that going?
So I would see Bitcoin and Ethereum as just completely separate things.
Okay.
And so what Bitcoin does for money, Ethereum is trying to do for the whole internet. So Ethereum, basically, it's trying to make a more democratized internet where the current services we access and the websites, our emails, and everything we do online, we are reliant on central servers, and we hand a lot of power over to like Google, who controls your email, and Facebook, whatever. And the core premise of Ethereum is they want to make that decentralized. And NFTs, and some NFTs may sound really stupid, pictures of apes, but I think at the core of that, what it really is a digital object that you can own, like a sword in World of Warcraft, but the sword you have in World of Warcraft, it is not yours. Blizzard can take it away from you. But that picture, the representation of that picture, you can own that. And I think we're going to see more sophisticated applications of that in the future. As for Bitcoin, I would see more Latin American countries adopting it as legal tender.
As legal tender, yeah.
Yeah.
When you so just I don't know if you've seen this little video of Nassim Taleb. He does these equations about he thinks Bitcoin goes to zero because it has no cash flows and has no expected. So expected future cash flows are also going to be zero if you value it as an asset. But what you're talking about is if governments are using it as currency, then maybe it has a very interesting future.
Yeah. So developers are making scaling solutions for Bitcoin, and I think some of them are actually working quite well. They may not be so readily accessible to an everyday user, but this is something that is only 10 years old. And I think these things are going to improve. And ultimately, when those countries make it legal tender, it's not just as a medium of transaction, but also as something to hold in the reserves as an inflation hedge.
Right. I can see that. Okay, let's talk about some interesting individuals. So you have a little section in the book about Jerry Cotton. Could you first explain who he is or was, and then talk about what happened to him?
So he was he founded one of Canada's biggest exchanges, and at one point it was like the main exchange to which everyone flocked. But he was reported dead in a couple of years, 2 or 3 years ago, and basically the whole thing collapsed. And lots of people are out lots of money. I think it's like 200 million or something like that. And people are saying that he faked his death, and while that may or may not be confirmed, what is confirmed is that he ran a lot of scams as a kid, and he basically took a lot of users' money and used it to gamble on his own personal trades.
You met him, right?
Yes.
Did you get any vibe that would have suggested this guy's a little shady, or anything like that came out of your interaction?
Not at all.
No.
I suspected nothing at the time, and I even used this exchange.
Yeah.
But I talked to someone else, and he said he met him around the same time, and he said Jerry was basically showing off that he was running scams as a kid, teenager. He was like very proud of that. So perhaps he didn't really keep it a secret.
Do you think there's truth to the rumor that he may be still alive?
So I know that HarperCollins is putting out a book by his widow soon.
Okay.
And they use the word widow, and so if he is still alive, it's a big blemish on HarperCollins. And it's also ghostwritten, I guess co-written by a very respected author in Canada. So it's egg on his face as well.
Right.
If he's still alive.
Right.
But
okay.
Ultimately, I think we'll never know.
Right. But he did some strange things that in his will, he gave some very specific instructions about running his business and things. So I guess we may never know. But it is curious. A curious case. It's quite a colorful case. The other one that you speak about at some length is Jan Serrato. Could you tell us a little bit about him?
So he is a man I met in Calgary, and he has a bit of a complicated past. He has been taken to court many times, and but I should say a lot of the times there wasn't any definitive judgment against him, but people have won a lot of judgments against him. People won lots of judgments against him for debts he owed. And I think through crypto, he might have had a new beginning. I think when I look at him pre-crypto, after crypto, it's like night and day. And 2017, that was a crazy period. 1,000 to 20,000, that's how much Bitcoin surged. And he did very well for himself. and he became like a focal point in the community because he held like weekly meetups in a casino. And he started this, and he would, to be fair to him, he would later say that he didn't actually start it. It was not his idea, but this was associated with him, and he promoted this project. It's called a Whale Club, and basically a pooled investment service. And it ran afoul of the authorities, and people lost lots of money, and we are waiting a decision from the local Securities Commission.
Mm-hmm. And you tried to get an interview with him towards around this time, around the investigation, right? And he gave you he was quite dismissive, wasn't he, at first, or more than dismissive. He seems like somebody, the picture I get is somebody who is a bit of just a profiteer. So in other words, there are some people who you describe in the book, and some people you listen to them speak about crypto and Bitcoin particularly. They have a very strong libertarian, pro-freedom bent, etc. This guy didn't strike me as that at all. He struck me as, here's a lot of money pouring in this thing. How can I make money from this thing?
Well, I think we all contain multitudes, and I don't think one person is completely this thing or the other. But yeah, I think he definitely might have been driven more by money than some people. And he actually did tell me directly that he doesn't care about crypto as much as I think he does. He's using it to take advantage of the moment. I think those are his exact words.
And there are probably, there are lots of people doing that right now.
Yeah, and I think even people who are who say they are driven by ideology, and I think at the base of it, no one is unmoved by material gain.
Yeah. So the other kind of classic theory in economics, and again, I'm still trying to think about, are we in a new paradigm, right? That the economics textbooks need to be rewritten or not. I don't know. But is that greater fool theory? So people know that, you're probably well aware that they buy into this stuff knowing that it probably doesn't have any fundamental value, or not much, or it's well overvalued. But there will be a greater fool that I can sell this on to later. And is that, what do you make of that? What do you make of that when you say this is all a bubble, greater fool theory? This stuff, in the end, it's all going to end in tears.
Well, first of all, I think I would say that I feel the term bubble, it describes periods, not things. So things can be in a bubble, and I think perhaps we are overdue for a correction in crypto. But at the same time, I think this greater fool theory, you can probably apply that to everything. All the financial instruments are, why do people play the markets? To make money.
Sure, and there's an element of faith in anything. You buy an Apple stock. There's no guarantee they're going to sell more phones, computers.
Oh yeah, remember the whole GameStop thing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm curious as well about your thoughts on traditional financial institutions getting into crypto, and why they're doing it, and what that means for the space.
Well, they're doing it to make money, I think.
Sure.
And I think the space has been watching this ETF thing very closely. They've been watching it sit for years. I think 5 years. Everyone was talking about ETFs, and all these companies were trying to apply for ETFs, and we actually still don't have the ETF that everyone's pining for, because I think the issue with buying crypto is that, as we talked about earlier, it's a difficult thing. You have to download a wallet, and it might look sketchy, and if you lose your password, you lose everything. And it's also not tax advantaged. So, can you hold I think in Canada we have TSFAs, tax-free savings accounts. I'm sure there's an equivalent in the US, Roth IRA or whatever.
We have something in the UK called an ISA, which is same idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So in order to hold Bitcoin in that I think people think they need an ETF, or you buy shares in a Bitcoin mining company, which I think people might deem that riskier because the value might float not just on Bitcoin, but also the company specifics. So anyway, the view is that mainstream companies entering this with ETFs, there's going to be a huge flood of mainstream interest.
Well, we'll see. Yeah, it sounds like something that would make it more of a mainstream thing. And I think what we're also seeing, just to counter that whole bubble argument, is there is slowly more belief being built in to this space, which isn't worthless, is it?
Yeah, and I think ultimately, if you look at what traditional money is, it's the whole traditional financial system. Money is just a collective delusion. And I remember when people were trying to mint that, I guess there was talk of minting that $1 trillion coin in the US because I think the Republicans were barring the Democrats from trying to raise the debt ceiling, and they were trying to find a way to make money without going through Congress. And there were people saying, yeah, yo, we can just mint like $1 trillion coin. And
right.
Someone wrote in the New York Times that we shouldn't do this because it destroys this collective delusion. It lets people realize that money is stupid. So I think ultimately, like, when you talk about this faith in crypto, I think sentiment can drive lots of things.
Absolutely. Could you talk a little bit about your venture in? We haven't talked about mining at all, Bitcoin mining. And again, for the uninitiated, what is Bitcoin mining?
So you basically operate a server and which verifies all the Bitcoin transactions, facilitates transactions, adding to the blockchain, and at the same time that creates Bitcoins for you. That's basically it.
Okay, so once a Bitcoin miner presumes that you're not a Bitcoin miner now.
That is correct.
Yeah. Why?
Well, I mostly started my mining company as a vehicle for the book.
Right.
So, and I think 2019, that's when I winded it down, and that was when I actually sat down and started to write everything.
Yeah.
So I had to wind that up, but it was a fun experience, definitely.
What was your experience with energy costs associated with doing this?
So we would I think we didn't have that big a facility, but it would be like almost maybe tens of thousands a month.
And dollars of electricity costs?
Yeah,
Wow.
that was our main cost, and we actually had a discount, and we lucked into a really good arrangement with the owner of a coffee warehouse.
Okay.
Because they needed a lot of space, but they didn't need the power, and
Right.
we took up only a small corner. We didn't need the space, so perfect arrangement.
Right. Okay. So interesting. It's such a different. It's something completely new that we didn't know existed. Just over 10 years ago. And I guess 10 years ago, Bitcoin mining could be done on a laptop. Is that right?
Oh yeah. 10 years ago was a different time, and there were lots of people. They've mined like 3-4 Bitcoins, which back then was worth nothing, but now it's worth a lot.
And because of the way in which Bitcoins get distributed, I presume then that those energy costs will only increase. Is that right over the coming years in terms of?
Yeah. So the way mining works is that the more people mine, the harder that process becomes, because the results, the rewards, they are limited and they don't change. So when more people mine, more people just share the same rewards. But Bitcoin can operate perfectly fine if you. We have an example when China kicked out all of its miners. The computing power that went into Bitcoin mining, it dropped by half, but Bitcoin was still running fine. So it doesn't need that much power. Right.
Gotcha. And I guess one of the what I find interesting is this concept of frontier, the kind of the defensive adventure. You guys are the early adopters, you're adventurers by heart, and there's some overlap, and you draw the parallel of frontier myth with you spent some time in the Canadian West, and I find that so appropriate because it is adventure. But could you talk a little bit about that? And frontier myth also has the word myth in it. So what's the what's the myth part? What's the stuff that they don't tell you about when you set off on these wild adventures?
So I think the frontier myth is definitely a myth. Why people pine for the frontier in the past, it's heavily romanticized, and for good reason, because the actual frontier, the actual Old West, there was a lot of injustice, colonialism, and brutality. But ultimately, the Alexander Pushkin said a deception that elevates us is dearer than a host of low truths. So I think this myth, it's more palatable and it's spread. And when we talk about the frontier now, we're rarely talking about actual history. It's just this idea that we have built through Westerns. And what makes it so attractive is it's very spacious and welcoming, and it's full of opportunity and riches. And also you're free from the societal hierarchies back home. So imagine you're a poor kid in Ireland. You owe your landlord money, of gambling debts, but hey, you get a ticket to the new world, start afresh. And I think it's very much like in crypto, and what people seek in this world. It's what people sought in the West in the past.
Yeah, and you describe a lot of people who've they're pre and post crypto selves. Are totally different things. And I guess you would say that about yourself.
Yeah, I would say the interesting thing about crypto, and it's becoming less and less so now, but more so in the past, that if you were to enter, the most established person in crypto only has 10 years more experience than you.
Sure.
And 5 years ago, the most experienced person in crypto has only 5 years more experience than you. So it's a place where your past life does not matter. And as much as you can get to, as close as you can get to such absolutes, everyone is starting afresh.
Right. So just thinking about starting afresh, what would you say to anyone who's listening to this who's intrigued by the crypto space but might be saying to themselves, I'm too late, I can't, there's nothing I can get involved with now, or they might be taken in by one of these scams that might be going around. So what would you advise to someone who's I want to get involved in this, but I don't really know how or what the best approach is or anything like that? What would you advise?
Well, I would say to do this incrementally. And so I think lots of people, perhaps they do not understand the traditional financial markets in the first place, like what's backwardation, what's futures. So if you are not already investing, perhaps don't jump into crypto. Maybe try traditional investing first. And if you are already investing, maybe you can jump into Bitcoin. But from Bitcoin to Doge and NFTs, that's another jump. So I guess don't buy those dog coins unless you already have Bitcoin and you know what you're doing.
Right. And what do you make of all these influencers selling, shit coins and whatever else like that?
Well, I don't think it's going to end well. I think for lots of people it's going to end very badly. But such is the way of this world, I guess. And I think ultimately, someone watching those TikTok videos, maybe if they buy Doge or what's the other one, Shiba Inu, if they buy that and they get burned, but maybe they'll get more educated about the financial markets through that, and maybe they'll do other investing, and maybe they'll put their money in Bitcoin afterward.
Okay. So again, you think Bitcoin, Ethereum, those are the main places to be if you're thinking purely crypto?
Yeah, I would say there are probably other coins that are worth something, but I remember 2017 was a crazy period. They had these things called ICOs. So companies would create their own coins, sell them to make money. 5.5 billion raised, and now 90% of them have just faded away into obscurity. So most coins are shit coins. So yeah, if you want to start, maybe Bitcoin, Ethereum, but if you want to move it into others, spend some time in the space before you do that.
Right, or be prepared to lose whatever you throw into it. Good stuff. This has been a great, wide-ranging conversation. I really enjoyed this, and I really enjoyed your book, and I love the way in which you tell stories. Was there anything that you wanted to mention that we didn't really get a chance to talk about in this space?
Not really. I think we covered everything.
All right, Ethan, this is great. Fantastic. So actually, before we do wrap up, I also wanted to ask you, where do you go from here? I know you've got a book out about, or coming out about, the pandemic, but what else?
Yeah.
What are you thinking about? Like what projects and things that you're considering doing?
Well, I still have a column in the newspaper, so I'm continuing doing that, and I have like potentially two other book projects, non-crypto, and that's about it. And I'm gonna write about Virgil Griffith's sentencing in January.
Okay. Yeah. In a book, or in an article, or
probably in a magazine, in a magazine or in my newspaper column somewhere. Okay,
fantastic. Yeah. So for people who are listening to this and want to know how to get the book, how to follow you, all of that good stuff, what are some of the best places?
I think I'm easily Googleable, and my last name is spelled Lou. And if you want to buy the book, I would say try to avoid Amazon.
Yeah.
And I'm a big supporter of local businesses.
Right. You're not a fan of big tech, are you?
Not that much.
Right.
I feel I do agree with the people who say that they are having too much power.
Right. Okay. Fantastic. So, Ethan, this was great. I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me and to my listeners, and I wish you all the best. And once again, congratulations on the book. I think it's fabulous, and I wish you all the best.
Oh, thank you. It's an absolute pleasure.